Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Open Education Working Group webinar, in which we will talk about open science and open education. I'm Annalisa. I'm a PhD candidate and a co-coordinator of the Open Education Working Group, together with Javier Atenas, who is here today hosting the webinar with myself. Hello, Javi.
Hello, I'm not sure if it's broadcasting.
It is broadcasting, yes. We are live, together with Javier Atenas, who is here today hosting the webinar with myself. Today, hi.
Broadcasting.
So, today we have two great guests. Yes, Laura Campbell, an expert in open education, OER and open education policy. Lorna leads the Open Scotland initiative and is a member of the advisory board of the Open Education Working Group. Guido is the coordinator of the Leibniz Research Alliance Science 2.0. I hope I pronounced that okay, which is part of an association that promotes science and research in partnership with various institutions. Lorna was an invited speaker at the recent International Open Science Conference organized by Guido, with a keynote on crossing the field boundaries, open science, open data, and open education. So I will start asking some questions to Guido, but please, Lorna, feel free to add your input, and Javi as well. And I will be asking you some questions as well in a moment. So Guido, could you tell us what are the purposes of the Leibniz, again, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it well, Research Alliance Science 2.0, and what is your role in it?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thank you a lot for the kind invitation. Maybe I should add that I work for the ZBW. It's called Leibniz Information Center for Economics. It's a large library for economic literature. And we have locations in Kiel and Hamburg, or I am from Kiel. And because it's important to know that we are from a library background in that context. And yeah, about the Leibniz Research Alliance Science 2.0. So it started several years ago. So everything happens in the context of the digitization of research. So what we saw is that the research system is changing because of the digitization. No? And especially we saw that, for example, researchers start to apply complete new habits. For example, they start to blog, they start to tweet, they're using wikis, they do online content sharing, they use academic social networks, different other online tools. So everything that we refer to as participative tools are going to change the research system. So they are going to produce new scientific output, for example. So they start to publish in open access journals or open access publication, or use blog as new publication format, and also try to communicate in different ways. So we have complete new ways for participation, communication, collaboration, and so on. And we saw this will change traditional ways of doing publications and doing research. And this affects libraries, of course, because our objective is to bring scientific literature to the users. And so in that context, if, for example, with open access or new publication formats, the number of publications is increasing, especially digital content is increasing, and also new types. So we need new means to collect and to index these large amount of publications. And also we need new ways to bring the literature to the customers. So they are online, they are digital, and they need new services to support them with literature. And this was the starting point to see that all this movement is happening, but we don't really know what is happening and why it is happening. And yeah, and then we referred it, or we named it, the so-called Science 2.0, or we say Science 2.0 for us is the use of participative tools in publication and research. And this was a starting point, and it's a movement that affects, besides libraries, the complete system, all stakeholders in the scientific system. And that was a starting point to start with the Leibniz Research Alliance Science 2.0. It was end of 2012. And this is an instrument of the so-called Leibniz Association. strategic instruments to foster interdisciplinary research within the Leibniz Association, and also to foster collaboration with external institutions in Germany, universities, and also research facilities. And yeah, and among currently we have 36 partners. Objective is exactly to examine the effects of Science 2.0 of research and publication processes. And among all of currently 36 partners, half of them have a library background so far. So that's good for us that the library community sees as a chance to address this topic and to also to bring our own points into it, to accompany this development. And that was, this was the starting point. So now we are about 4.5 years old. And in the meantime, we faced a movement from Science 2.0 to open science.
Lovely, that's great. So now, could you tell us what is your personal interest in open science, and how did you start working in this area?
So, based on the Leibniz Research Alliance, so there are 3 points. First of all, we saw at the very beginning that we cannot see Science 2.0 isolated from the open science movement. We separate the terms because in our understanding, Science 2.0 is the use of participative tools in research and publication processes, and open science is about opening up the scientific process or research process itself, for example, by open peer review and so forth, and also to open up the products, scientific products, for example, open access, open data, and so on. And for example, you can write a publication with Google Docs. This is Science 2.0, and you can publish it in an enclosed journal. There's no open science. On the other way, you can write a publication with Word, and you can publish it in an open access journal. This is no open science, but it's open science. So we differentiate 2 terms, but we saw we cannot really isolate because both can fuel together very good. So, and we also addressed the topic open science in different projects in our research alliance. For example, we had a study about data academic sharing. And that was also the starting point. And the second development was that on the European policy level, 3 years ago, they started a public consultation on Science 2.0. They used the term Science 2.0. They published a background paper and asked the community, what do you think about this development? And there was questions about what are the barriers, what are the benefits, what are the required policy actions, and also what is the appropriate term. And in the background paper, they used very often the term open something, open source, open data, open code, and so on, and open peer review, for example, but also about blogging and using wikis and so on. But based on that development, they renamed their mission to open science. So this was the starting point for the European open science agenda. And this was also a topic in the last conferences. So the Open Science Conference is the 4th conference, and the first 3 conferences were under the label Science 2.0 Conference. So we renamed the conference from Science 2.0 to Open Science Conference because it better fits the complete community, better addresses their needs. And yes, I think this year we will also discuss about a renaming from Science 2.0 Research Alliance to Leibniz Research Alliance Open Science, I think.
Right. So, now that you mentioned the conference took place just now in March, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us a little bit more of the reasons why you have organized this conference? What's all the background here?
Yeah. So we started with the term Science 2.0 Conference, and we saw that there's no conference dedicated to that topic especially, and we wanted to address all stakeholder groups affected by this movement. And that's why we started with the Science 2.0 conference, which invites librarians, researchers, practitioners, people from academia, from universities, people from politicians' backgrounds, funding agencies, and so on. So we address all stakeholder groups that are involved in this movement. And yeah, and as I said before, in the context of the developments on the European policy level, we renamed this year to Open Science Conference, and this had a great impact. We moved to Berlin and moved to Open Science from the terminology, and and this year the conference was completely sold out several weeks before. So Professor Klaus Tochtermann, the chair of the conference, mentioned in the opening statement that Open Science gained momentum. So we provide a platform for all stakeholders involved in the open science movement and want to be established at one of the most important conferences in Europe. And currently we saw there's a broad open science movement happening, and that's why it was so successful this year.
That's great. Congratulations for that. And what interested us as an open education working group was the fact that the thematic focus of the conference was on open education resources. Why this particular focus?
Yeah, so one reason was that last year we had the steering committee meeting, and we said what should be the focus for 2017, and we have several partners from an educational background in our research alliance, and then they proposed, okay, let's do something with open education resources, because we think so last year also a group formed in our research alliance that deal with bringing open science practice into education, or how to teach open science practices. And they have also somehow a correlation with open education or open educational resources. And it's important to teach open science. And this was also the linking point. And also based from the terminology, so open science, open educational resource, or open education, they have the term open in it. And that was the point. Let's see what, based on that term matching, what does open means in open science, and what does open means in open educational resources and open education, and are there links between the both communities? And that was the starting point to say, okay, then next year we will try to bring both topics on the agenda of the conference.
If I could just chip in there as well, I think it was very timely to have the focus on open educational resources this year, as 2017 has been designated as the Year of Open as a result of a number of important anniversaries that are taking place this year. You'll know yourself, Guido, that it's I think it's 15th anniversary of the Budapest Agreement on Open Access, the 15th anniversary of the first Creative Commons licenses, it's 10th anniversary of the Cape Town Declaration of Open Education, and the 5th anniversary of the Paris OER Declaration. So there's a large number of events going on around the world focused on open education. So certainly to bring the Open Science Conference under that umbrella was very, very important. So yes, it was very timely.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
I'm a little bit curious now. What is your personal interest in open education then, Guido?
Yeah, so my personal interest. So generally, I think that everything with this open or open education, because it's open educational resources, is a big chance to have access to a huge amount of knowledge. So everything behind open science or open educational resources is a culture of sharing and collaboration, and especially I profit from the culture of sharing. For example, so generally in the open education context, in my stage, I'm more an informal learner instead of a formal learner. So I'm far away from university. But I'm still trying to educate myself and to learn some things. And yeah, and when I see in my everyday life, for example, I use Wikipedia every day. It's standard. It's common. I would regard it as open educational resource, but I also profit in my private life very often from the willing of other people to share their knowledge. And can you give you a very private example? I'm a fan of bicycling, and of course, some parts broke someday. I have to repair, I have to fix it. And I always found an appropriate video on YouTube. How can I fix that part of my bike? And I profit from that open approach to share knowledge. Okay, it's no open education resource in that sense, but I think from the beginning at the basics, culture of sharing and knowledge sharing and collaboration has a big benefit in everyday's life.
I would certainly agree with that, and I think the role of resources like Wikipedia and all the Wikimedia tools is really important in open education. And certainly here in the UK, we have an increasing number of Wikimedians and residents working at not just galleries and museums, but also at universities. And at the University of Edinburgh, we have Ewan McAndrew, Wikimedian in residence, and that really is about embedding open knowledge in higher education, so that Wikimedia becomes effectively a digital literacy tool, an open knowledge tool. So it's not just about using the information there, it's about actually creating open knowledge. It's about editing Wikipedia, using Wikidata, etc. So I think these tools, and also tools like YouTube, have got an really important role to play in open education.
Then I have a question for both of you, actually. So where do you think is the value of open education in open science?
Yeah, this is, I think, a somehow complex question. So maybe so after the conference so on the conference we had day one, focus on open science. There was a focus on European open science policy and focus on research data, open research data, or research data infrastructure. Second day was more on open educational resources, and we had a panel on the first day, a panel about the link between open educational resources and open science. And to sum up, I think there was a common agreement during the panel that there are a lot of correlations, but we are at the very beginning. So maybe that's as a first statement. But I think generally, for me, the most common aspects, generally, they have a somehow same understanding what openness means. So openness, but they describe it in different ways. For example, so I think both concepts has this culture of collaboration and sharing at its heart in different aspects. And that collaboration to collaboratively create open educational resource, for example, in our case, to collaborate when producing research data, analyzing research data, and share some things. But collaboration and sharing is it's at its heart. And yet what was for me quite new, but it was really interesting for me. For example, and the 5 R's are very important, I think, in the open education resource community. These retain, reuse, revise, remix, redistribute. And these are exactly also those aspects that are important for the open science community as well. But they describe it in different ways. They say, okay, it's more about knowledge is open if anyone is free to access, use, modify, and share it. But generally, the same concept behind that things must be available, that must be reusable. You must modify it, and you can republish it if you want. And I think that it's really, really, really good. And for me, it's now what I think where the most important aspects of open education or open educational research and open science practices. As I said before, so one thing is open science must be taught some way. So scientists must learn open science practices, and I think that open educational resources can can help them as material to learn about open science. And both, if they use an open educational resource to learn open science practices, it's also an sort of applying open science techniques while learning about open science practices. So they can also, if they can use an open educational resource to learn on specific open science practice, and then they can give feedback, they can modify it, they can add something to innovate and to update this resource. And yes, there was a really interesting and also an open educational resource can be used by scientists to teach the public. That was also an important outcome from the conference. That, for example, if you want to, there was an interesting talk about how to engage the public in the context of citizen science in open science. And for example, an open educational resource can also be used to teach the public or to inform the public about what we are doing here. And the second point is that is quite interesting is there was an ignition talk at the Barcamp about the role of open education resource or education and open science. And so that was really interesting because it was given by Anna-Quentin Bock, and she pointed out that we have to start at the very beginning. So the core concept of open science and also open educational resource is culture of sharing and collaboration. But the current system is based on competition and reward a single person and not a collaboration. So what she pointed out was that we have to start at the school with more focus on culture share, collaboration culture, so that the young people already learn at the very beginning how to profit and how to apply a culture of sharing. And when they will go to the universities and to the science system, for them it's maybe somehow normal to share and to collaborate. In the current system, you leave the university and then you are facing with an open and sharing and collaborative science system that is hard to accept. And on that point, I think it was a common agreement that that the current problems both communities are facing, the open science and the open educational resource community, is that it's not a technical problem, it's a societal, it's a cultural problem, that there must be the change start.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree that there's a lot of commonality between open education and open science, and I think each can benefit from the other. Certainly in terms of open education, there's a lot that education could gain from having greater access to open data of all kinds. And I think if students and teachers have got access to open science data, for example, that's an immensely powerful learning resource. And I know Javiera and Leo, through this working group, have written a very important report on open data as OER. And I certainly think that's one area where open science can contribute significantly to education. But of course, it also goes the other way, and I think open education has got a lot to offer science education. And Guido spoke there about the importance of public engagement, and I think that's one really important area. And well, during the conference, I gave a nice example from the University of Edinburgh, where the School of Geosciences, students in their final year there, they actually have a public engagement course where students are encouraged to go out and work with members of the public, to work with bodies outside the institution, schools, museums, clubs, forestry commission, all kinds of environmental agencies, and to develop a wide range of resources for that communicate some aspect of science education. That might be poster, it could be a workshop, it could be a learning resource. But what we've done recently is we've taken that one step further, and we've taken the resources created by the students for science outreach and public engagement, and we've openly licensed them and re-released them as open educational resources. So we've got a nice kind of virtuous circle there of public engagement and openness. And one of the things that's really nice is that it encourages students to co-create their own learning, and it teaches exactly the kind of collaboration, co-working skills that you're talking about that are so important. And I think sometimes in science education there is perhaps a bit of a tendency to let these things come second a little bit. So initiatives like that I think are really important, and certainly in Edinburgh I know the geosciences team have found that the students have responded really, really positively to having that opportunity to work with agencies out with the university and to learn these kind of soft skills that they have gone on to find really valuable later in life when they've graduated and started working. So I think there's a lot that open education can gain from open science, and there's a lot that open science can gain from open education. And I absolutely agree with Guido that we need to teach scientists how to be open practitioners. That's a process, it's a learning process. And I think open education can help with that a lot.
Thanks, Lorna. That's really interesting about your co-creation with the students. I think that is really important, at least in my short experience at the University of Dundee. I was really fascinated by the title of your talk, Crossing the Field Boundaries. Do you think the boundaries between these two spaces, open science, open education, are still quite rigid at the moment? And how can we contribute to loosen them up?
Well, I think this conference is exactly the way that we can start to break down these boundaries, because I think there is a bit of a tendency that we work in our open silos, that we have open education, we have open access, open science, open data, and we're all doing our own thing and making good progress, but there's not quite enough interconnect, I think, between these areas. So I think anything that helps to break down these barriers can only be a good thing, and certainly conferences like this that really sort of extend the welcome to people working in open education are really, really important. I mean, it's not a conference that I've attended previously, and it was great to have an opportunity to come along and speak and to meet new colleagues. Similarly, last year, the Open Educational Resources Conference, which runs annually in the UK, last year had a special focus on open culture, because we wanted to reach out to the GLAM sector, because there's a lot of really excellent work going on in the GLAM sector that could feed into open education. But again, they're kind of like over there doing their thing. So we want to try and bring them in and welcome them into our space as well. So I think a lot of it has just got to do with keeping these communication channels open and remembering that we do have a lot that we can learn from each other, and that, I mean, I certainly tend to see open education, open science, open access, open data, they're all part of the open landscape, and we just need to know how to navigate between them and how to sort of reach out across these boundaries.
Absolutely, I completely agree about that. I just had a couple of questions really for both of you. I was interested in the fact that the conference had a bar camp, but it had also many other interesting sessions. And what came out of the conference that you think is of particular interest?
So yeah, I have some points. So the first point, I'm not sure where the link to open educational resources, but in the context of research data or open research data, currently the so-called fair data principles can be seen as everything must be fair in the context. So fair data principles are principles that they say access to data must be findable, interoperable, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And I think in this context, it's often mentioned as the principles to access open data. And I'm not sure how to apply this for open educational resources, because in the open science or open data community, often there are they say, okay, data must be open, but with limitations. So the term often is open as default, but closed when necessary. This has the background, for example, that we are dealing with private data, also with privacy data, and also with data, for example, from companies. But now we have, so principles are principles, and for example, the internet was not based on, the success of the internet was not based on principles, it was based on standards, on core standards. And now we need core standards that have to be applied in the open data community. The second thing is, which was really mentioned in the open science and also in the open educational resources talk, was open means not free. That was a bit curious for us, but I think the thing behind is that for both of us, for open data or open educational resources, you need infrastructures, you need platforms to access them, and they must be financed somehow. So you need some funding for that. And this is a point that you say, okay, it's open, mainly for the users, but the running of these infrastructures and platforms, we need long-term sustainable business models to run these infrastructures. And this was for me also an interesting point that addresses both. The third thing was already mentioned, but also mentioned in both in the open science and open education resources talks, is that the problems we are currently facing, the barriers are not technical, the barriers are societal, cultural. So we need, for example, in the open science context, we need new incentives, which mainly means that we need better or maybe other metrics to measure the open science practices. In this context, for example, the European Commission launched recently the so-called Open Science Monitor in Europe. It's a platform that should monitor all open science, or give an overview about the open science progress in Europe, for example. Then another thing is that the big chunks of both open science and also open educational resource is to better involve the public, to engage the public in open science in this context of citizen science, but also in the science in the context of the learning, so that they apply different chances to apply learning models for different type of learners, and to have more feedback channels with citizens, for example, when they apply or when they use such resources. And the last thing is, it was a talk by Marco Kals from the Open University, and that was interesting for me, because he said that we still propagating that open is good, but there's some evidence missing. For example, that the impact, that is evidence that open educational resource impact has, for example, an impact on innovation. So often they say open educational resources can foster innovation, but there's no evidence behind that. And he pointed out that there's some aspects should be under research to bring up the evidences. And this is also the same for the open science community. So we say, okay, from an common perspective, we say, okay, if everything is open, yes, it's good, it will be better. Yes, it may be true, but the benefits, the evidence that, for example, if everything is open, really fosters innovation in open science and really make science better and more efficient, is also still an issue where we need some research and some evidence. So that are my major observations.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with all of those, Guido. Certainly, open education isn't the same as free education, and there is always a cost associated with openness, because whether you're talking about the creation of open educational resources or open online courses, somebody has to create these resources and maintain them. So there is always a cost. But of course, the benefit of openness is that if you create resources and materials to be openly licensed from the first, it means that they can be used further down the line. And that doesn't just mean used widely. That can even just be within your own institution, because we all know what happens is, you know, when staff move around, go to other institutions, materials get lost, or they get locked inside platforms, or you don't know where the image in that slide came from. You don't know if you can reuse it again. If you actually build openness in right at the beginning, it makes your resources so much more reusable inside your own institution, never mind when you start sharing them more widely. So I think that's an important part. Openness does need to be sustained. It really helps if you've got policies that support existing open practice. Really what you want is to support open practice that can grow from the ground up, but at the same time is supported by institutional policies that will give your staff permission and the right to actually become open practitioners. So I think that's very important. We need to sell openness to our senior managers within our institutions. And I certainly what Marco said was right, is there is a bit of a lack of evidence-based research on the impact of open education. It's very, very difficult to measure the impact of open education. It's very hard to measure reuse of open education resources. There's quite often an assumption that reuse means taking a resource, maybe changing it a bit and reusing that resource with your class. But reuse can be something as subtle as reading a resource, how it influences your thinking and the way you teach your class. There's all different kinds of reuse, and it's hard to measure the impact. But we certainly, I think, we do need more research into the impact of open education, particularly to convince government ministries and funding bodies that really, you know, this is the way that we need to go. I think the issue of open standards is interesting, and I can see the need for open standards in open science. I actually worked for about 10 years in the domain of open standards for education. I worked with a lot of standards bodies in the development of technical standards, metadata standards, content standards, all kinds of standards. Some of them were more successful than others. One of the things that is difficult about standardizing open education or developing standards for the management of open education resources is that it's such a diverse field, and it's very hard to pin down what an open educational resource is. One of the most common definitions is that it's anything with an open license that can be used in the context of teaching and learning. So certainly the approach that we've taken here in the UK is, with the last big open education programme, and I know some institutions are taking the same approach, is to encourage staff to use the tools that they're already familiar with, whether that's wikis or blogs or institutional systems. Put your resources there, put them anywhere that is convenient for you. And then what we need to do is build systems that can aggregate these resources from different places. So I think it's that content aggregation that's really important, rather than saying you must use a repository or you must use this particular profile of this particular metadata standard, because we find that that's not necessarily successful with open educational resources. But what we do need is to be able to build systems that can aggregate on the basis of feeds and tags, and we need to be able to get much smarter about how we do that. So those are certainly some of the things that came to my mind during the conference.
That's amazing. And keeping on the line of this talk, Lorna, how do you think we can teach open science through open education protocols? And this is also for you, Guido.
Well, again, I think there are many different ways to integrate open education with open science. And I think it's really important to integrate that as early as possible. So when students are beginning their career as scientists, that they're made aware of the value and the importance of openness, of open science, of open data, but that they have the opportunity to work with and to create and develop open educational resources as well. So I really think it's important that we practice what we preach. So it's not enough just to say, yes, open educational resources are good, you should use them. I think it's important to show that you actually are using them. Similarly, it's just very simple things like when we talk at conferences, we make sure that we use open licensed images and that the image permissions are on our slides. So I think, leading by that example is very important. And really, I think involving students in their own education right from the beginning is very, very important. And again, it comes back to this issue of co-creation. And I think open educational resources can really help with that in open science.
Yeah, I can only fully agree with Lorna's expressions. So I think the first thing is practice what you preach is very important. For example, in our academic data sharing study, we found out that 80% of the researchers say, okay, data sharing is good, but only below 20% are practicing it. So there's a big gap. And I think, as Lorna already said, is in short term, we should try to use open educational resources as one means to teach open science practices. That is be very easy. You can start it tomorrow if you want, and to see what happens, how students, how scientists feel with that. And also, which also already mentioned by Lorna, and that I would again bring the link to the Ignition talk by Anne-Kathrin Bock, that we have to start with these practices at the early beginning. So we need a culture of sharing and collaboration starting at the beginning. And she said we have to bring open science practices into the classrooms. And with that, I think she's fully right.
I was looking for the button. I absolutely agree. I think here in this chat, even if Javiera is there muted, but she is one of the educators that does that, really practices what she has been talking about. Do you want to say something, Javi?
Okay, I have to unmute myself. I think I agree, and it's not that I think, I do agree completely. One of the things that I like the most is to take off the discourse into the praxis. We need more open data sets as part of the curriculum, and we need to understand that becoming an open practitioner is not just for science, but also for policies. So how do you develop openness as a transversal skill for the future, when it's not because universities only develop professionals, also they develop citizens, and hopefully critical citizens. So when we talk about using open resources, not just OER, just open data or silos of open materials, we talk about developing skills. It doesn't matter if you're from the social sciences or from the all the sciences, maths or physics or biology. You need to be able to relate as an individual or as a society, as a part of a society, in using open resources and understanding that using open images or sharing what you do. If you're an artist and you feel that you can share part of your work, for educators to use it freely, and if you think you can contribute to the knowledge economy, it would be great. It's not just about your professional practice, it's also about your personal and daily life as a citizen. So, yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. So, I would say, unless you have anything you would like to add, I'd bring the webinar to a close. And I would like to thank Lorna and Guido for the time today, and all of your contributions are really appreciated. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Thanks also to the participants. Obviously, this webinar is now recorded, so it will be available on YouTube for whoever wants to see it. We hope you enjoy it. And I would also like to thank Javiera, because she is a really true open and inclusive practitioner, and this is really important. And to close, I would like to invite everyone to continue the discussion on Twitter or in the Open Knowledge Forum, or by comment in the Open Knowledge blog. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Annalisa. It's lovely to talk to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Annalisa.
Thank you again for the kind
Thank you, Rona.
invitation.
Thank you, Guido.
See you.
Bye.
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 See you. Bye-bye.